So welcome to our fourth workshop in our four-part workshop series on science communication and policy impact. I'm Brandie Nonnecke, the director of the CITRIS Policy Lab and an associate research professor at the Goldman School of Public Policy. As a reminder, workshops 1 through 3, the video recordings are now available on the CITRIS Policy Lab website. You can check them out at citrispolicylab.org/SCPI workshops. I also want to point out that the CITRIS Policy Lab produced a podcast and video series called TecHype, where we debunk misunderstandings around emerging technologies and the laws and policies that shape them. So if you're interested in learning more about the perhaps 18 California bills related to AI that were recently signed into law, or want to better understand what's going to happen at the federal level around tech policy, please check out our show at techhype.org. The CITRIS Policy Lab, we really drive policy change through research-driven solutions. And the CITRIS Policy Lab does provide resources and services for those affiliated with our CITRIS campuses, which include UC Berkeley, UC Davis, UC Merced, and UC Santa Cruz. We can help you develop appropriate policy recommendations for both the public and private sector. We can help you strategize appropriate methods to communicate your research with those audiences. And we can even assist you in writing and crafting those outputs and deliverables. One thing we will be releasing in early 2025 will be the Broader Impacts Toolkit. I'm sure many of the viewers are submitting or have submitted federal grant proposals. As you're aware, Broader Impacts is a key component of those federal grant proposals, and we walk you through the process of identifying your public policy broader impacts, including how you can identify opportunities to engage with policymakers and the development of appropriate policy deliverables. Again, that will be released in January 2025. A bit of housekeeping for the guests today. Please put your questions into the chat. You can do this throughout the presentation, and you can upvote others' questions if you agree that that is something that we should be addressing. Now, today we're doing workshop 4, engaging with legislative and regulatory processes. This can include responding to a request for comment or a request for information from a federal or state agency. It can also include unsolicited feedback. So, for example, if your research that you're conducting, you know that it has a significant policy implication, how do you reach out to those policymakers to get them aware of your research and what they should do? All right, giving policymakers feedback. Now, there are 3 primary ways to give policymakers feedback. You can give feedback to someone who directly asked you. So, for example, perhaps a staffer for a member of Congress or a state legislature has reached out, given your expertise in an area, and would like you to provide comments or guidance. How can you best do that? Especially with all of you, I'm sure, have very, very tight, busy schedules. So how can you do that most effectively? The second would be giving feedback to someone who didn't ask you. So this could include, you've noticed that a bill has been drafted by a policymaker, a lawmaker, and you want to provide comments. How do you do that most effectively? And then the third, participating in an open call for feedback. As I've previously mentioned, federal and state agencies will often issue requests for comment or requests for information. Or if it is an agency that has authoritative power to issue rules, you can also comment on a notice of proposed rulemaking. First, giving solicited feedback. So somebody's reached out to you due to your expertise, your knowledge in an area. How do you effectively give them that feedback? The first, if they send you perhaps, let's say, a draft bill, you would actually want to go in and redline that document. So go into it, editing and suggestions being recorded, and actually put in the language. Do not worry about ensuring that your language is in line with the legalese of a bill or a law that you've already seen. There's an entire team that will then take that on to ensure that the way your idea has been written is in alignment with existing law, does not contradict existing law, and that the language can actually be operationalized. So Don't let that be a barrier to you actually redlining, putting in comments in a draft bill. I will share with you all one of my proudest moments. I was asked to review the California Consumer Privacy Act in the early stages, which was a proposition in the state of California. One of my concerns when reading that draft was that essentially it would ensure platforms the ability to push back against opening up their data for third-party research purposes that are in the public interest. And so I put in language in there to the extent of, data that has been anonymized, can be shared with third parties in instances where that data is very important for public interest work. Wrote that, submitted it back. The final bill that everybody voted on, that proposition, my language was in there, except it had a strike through in that. And they had changed the language that actually made it more impactful. So my idea was no longer part of this subcomponent, but now it applied throughout the entirety of the bill. And they had included a definition also for what does public interest research mean. So again, just get your idea across. The team there will ensure that the spirit of what you're trying to do is actually represented appropriately in the final document. The next is a policy memo. If you remember or participated in workshop 3, again, that video is available on the CITRIS Policy Lab website. A policy memo is a very short, pithy document, about 1 to 2 pages. Again, bluff, bottom line up front. What do you want them to do in alignment with a challenge that they're facing? And you want to provide that evidence at the beginning. Why is this an issue? How do you have the expertise? What should they do about it? Always actionable. And that's, again, a shorter document. Now, the third, you can also email back and forth with an individual who is asking for feedback. And this is obviously a lot more informal. Again, the overall goal throughout the entire process in every way you engage policymakers is always to make it as easy as possible for the person you are helping. Now let's move on to solicited feedback. Now this is where they've asked you. You want to, again, redline that document and give actual suggested language. Now it's not very helpful if somebody's asking you for comments on something and you just keep saying, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. They want to know, well, what should I do? Now, when giving solicited feedback, you definitely want to redline the document and ensure that your comments can be acted upon. So this means not providing language like, don't do this, this isn't appropriate, but really ensuring that they can act on it. You have the expertise. So again, provide comments and feedback where you can say, this is not going to be effective. Instead, I recommend, based off of my expertise, that you do this. And of course, do your research. Now, oftentimes they're reaching out to you for a reason because you're an expert in a space. Sometimes you might have a tangential expertise to the issue at hand. You might need to do that additional research to ensure that your recommendations can actually stick, that they make sense for the issue that they are facing. A policy memo is very short, 1 to 2 pages. It's an evidence-based document. You want to target a specific policy challenge and you want to offer actionable recommendations. Now, this is better fit for an internal audience. A policy memo is going to go directly to the individual who can act on your recommendation. An example here from some dear colleagues at the Aspen Tech Policy Hub, Mai Sisla and Betsy Cooper. You can see in the left image, they outline what is that challenge and opportunity. And then right away at the top, plan of action. Not don't do this, don't do that, but here's your plan of action. This is what you should do. This is how you can do it. And again, as always, make it incredibly easy and helpful for your power player to act on what you are recommending them to do. Now, again, helpful notes on giving feedback. Know why you are being asked and focus on that. So if you have deep expertise in one specific area, leverage that. That's probably why they're reaching out to you. For example, if you have deep expertise in privacy within online platforms, and it's a solicitation for feedback on how do we operationalize these privacy safeguards. You want to really focus on that. You can slip in your agenda. So if there is an issue that you want them to address and they are currently not, you can add that in if it's tangential to what they're actually asking you and it's still within your area of expertise. But again, they're reaching out to you for solicited feedback on a very specific component. So you really want to front and center that component of your work. I have some more ideas. So again, here are some tips. You want to really put your expertise there at the forefront, and you can also address some of these other issues moving forward. All right, now next, giving unsolicited feedback. Unsolicited feedback can be a white paper or a research report. White papers are really good at positioning yourself and your organization as a leader in this space. You can also do a policy brief, which is different from a policy memo. If you remember, a policy memo is more internally focused. It's just for that individual stakeholder, that organization, that institution. Short, bottom line up front. A policy brief is broader. You want to reach more of a broad audience. There is a formal format for policy briefs, which I will cover in a minute. And then you can also do an email exchange with an individual. Obviously, that's a lot more informal. Again, it's always make it as seamless and easy as possible. Let's talk about white papers. So a white paper is essentially a lengthy research report, and it's heavily footnoted. You've done a lot of research. It's deeply descriptive. At the CITRIS Policy Lab, our white papers are typically, 25 to 35 pages or so. And they are very helpful at getting across your research, your expertise, and what should be done. The example I provided here at the University of California, during the pandemic, we were faced with the issue of ensuring that all of our faculty, staff, and students were able to access the online services during the pandemic when we were within the shelter in place, work from home time. And so we looked at what the University of California had already done with its broadband infrastructure to best ensure that those away from campus could access. So in our work, we outlined technical mechanisms that could be implemented. For example, doing these Wi-Fi, extension networks off of campus so that those living in the, nearby area would be able to access the UC Wi-Fi infrastructure and actually attend their online courses. Another example here, now in contrast to a white paper, is a policy brief. And a policy brief is much longer. It's more for a public audience. It's more outward facing. And you want this to really describe the policy issue at hand. Again, even though it's longer, you need to be tight and succinct in the work. And you really want to lead with your recommendations. As always, I hope if you've learned anything out of these workshops, you will hear bluff all the time in the back of your head when you're thinking about writing, comments to policymakers. Bottom line up front, what do they need to do? Front and center those recommendations. Now, if you write a policy brief, you don't want to just put it out into the world and hope that it gets in the hands of those who can make a decision. You really want to make sure that you reach out to those entities that you want to act on your policy recommendation. So, of course, it's important after you publish this to set up meetings with those stakeholders and share with them the highlights in the recommendations. The next is giving unsolicited feedback. Again, these are recommendations for how do you do this effectively. You want to really build rapport. You want to develop your relationships with decision makers, especially their staffers. In workshop 2, which was a collaboration with the Federation of American Scientists, we explained that staffers are often really the front line where they are taking in the information and synthesizing and communicating that with the policymaker. Building rapport with staffers is incredibly important. And you will see over time that as you build up that rapport, those staffers will continue to reach out to you with greater frequency when they have an issue that's within your domain that they want you to comment on. There's also informal channels, emailing. You can just send your ideas directly to those individuals, but also leveraging different forms of media like social media. You can have a lot more power if you can get others to help elevate your message. And then also, of course, traditional media, same objective, writing an op-ed that highlights perhaps the insights from your policy brief and why action should be taken. This next section is one of my favorites to present on because responding to an open call for comments or information can feel very daunting at the beginning. Oftentimes, a federal agency will have a long laundry list of questions that they are trying to get information on. And as an academic or other, that can be incredibly daunting. Which questions do I reply to? Do I have to reply to all of the questions? How much information should I give for each of these questions? And the questions, there can be a dozen questions listed there. So let's go over what you should actually do. Now, why give feedback in the first place? You can inform the debate. Policymakers oftentimes are required to do a request for comment or request for information. Federal agencies are required to do this. The National Institute of Standards and Technology is one of the most prominent agencies that is constantly looking for feedback. You can provide new facts from your own research to inform their strategy. You can analyze the facts of a situation in a new way, or you can even produce new solutions to a problem that they have identified. Now, the caveat here, though, is that policymakers have oftentimes already decided what they want to do. Now, these submissions, as I mentioned, this process is often required of them, but that's not a problem for you to have impact, and I'll explain why. Now, for public comment, they have to review everything submitted. Okay, so you're essentially making a record, a public record, that you provided these recommendations. And that has two very impactful outcomes. The first being that others can use your work in the public comment to leverage their work. This oftentimes happens, especially when a center that's very similar to my own has also provided comments. Then I can see that we can leverage our work together down the line and be able to provide further recommendations. Now, the government can actually be forced to respond to what you're saying. A federal agency is required to provide a report on what was gleaned from a public comment process. Now, when that happens, if there's a lawsuit in the future, that work can be used as evidence. Your comments can be used as evidence to show that a problem or an issue was identified by individuals during this public comment period, but was not addressed. I think, replying to open calls is an extremely good idea. You can have a lot of impact, actually. So there are a lot of open calls on which you can provide policy feedback. Now, at the federal level, you typically have, once they post it, you have about 30 to 90 days to provide your comments. Now, the format of this, and I'll show you an example, is typically in a letter format. And I'll explain why we do that and what that will look like. And again, it's very important that you write in the style of don't do this, don't do that, that's a bad idea. But writing in the style of, here's what you should do. This is going to be a lot more effective. Of course, I understand that can oftentimes be coupled with the don't do this. Definitely do not provide comments that are just don't do this, don't do this. It can be don't do this, which you have proposed, federal agency, because of X, Y, and Z. It's not going to be effective. Instead, do this. That'll be a lot more helpful. It's more actionable. They can actually take it on. You really want to use detail and evidence, right? Back up your claims for why they should do something. Next, be specific about what you want. Provide them sample language. Again, don't worry about the language being in a specific format. Get your point across, and they will adjust that language in order for it to actually make sense within their agency. Appendices are good to back up your evidence. I would put more of the background detailed information in an appendix rather than in the body of the text because, bottom line up front, you want them to get the information that they need and act on it. And the last one, the more stakeholders signed on, the better. This is something we often engage in. We'll draft comments in response to a federal agency's request, and then we will reach out to sister organizations, institutions, experts in the field, and get them to sign on. And that just bolsters your argument. It shows, look, it's not just us, this single entity saying that this is what you should do. All of these organizations are behind these recommendations of what should be done. Here is an example on the left where we provided feedback to the European Union on their Digital Services Act. So you can see the letter format at the beginning. It's actually really, really important that you point out what you're commenting on. They often receive comments across various bills, various requests for comments, et cetera. So you want to make sure that you clearly outline what are you responding to. And then you can include your signatories there on the first page. Second page is that executive summary. This is what you should be doing. These are the problems. So for us, the Digital Services Act, which is a mechanism that enables the European Union to require platforms to make data available for independent research in the public interest, we had concerns that those platforms would not actually share data in a way that would be useful for independent researchers. And so you can see bold items. That's very important, right? So that when they look at it, they see what they should do. You can see this, independent intermediary bodies should be established to assist these entities in vetting researchers. Establish requirements for a high-value API access, application programming interface, which would be the mechanism by which researchers could gain access to data. Support platform auditor collaborations to conduct experiments, and then we provide evidence and background of, where within the DSA, the Digital Services Act, it's within Article 37. Does this justify our claim, right? We're bolstering our argument that it's part of the act as it is right now. So this is how you should do it. And then another example. Oh, I have another example here, and these slides will be shared on the CITRIS Policy Lab website where we've given comments to NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So where can you find out these requests for comments or requests for information? You can go to regulations.gov, which I will show you here in a minute. That contains information about all federal requests for comments and the deadlines. You can query the database by topical area, and you can look at where the active comments, and you can also look at what has been reported in the past on a particular issue. This can be helpful if you're looking for additional signatories or partners for you in your submission. You can see who else has been contributing in this space and how might we work together to make our shared recommendations stronger. So let me actually show you what regulations.gov looks like. I'm curious, the participants, have any of you gone to regulations.gov to look at open comments?
Nope.
So I just clicked it. If you saw me, I just clicked on, comments due soon. 29 requests for comments are due today, 33 in the next 3 days, and 130 in the next 7 days. Let's just look up artificial intelligence. So that's my area. This is a fun one. Artificial intelligence and copyright. So the U.S. Copyright Office is looking for comments on how do we deal with this challenge of generative AI systems being trained on copyrighted material, and then the work being produced out of those generative AI tools, does it have an effect on the original copyright of the original works? So you can see where you can submit. So again, actually, like let's take one of the topical areas from a participant. What areas are you interested in?
Privacy, maybe intersection of AI and privacy is interesting.
Let's just see what pops up. So these are somebody else's submission. You can see request for information related to NIST assignments under blah, 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 section executive order concerning AI. That one's closed. I don't know if there's any open comments due.
This OMB, like when it doesn't say the second document, what is that?
This is somebody else's submission.
I see.
Probably. Let's see.
Consolidated.
Their response. Actually, this is their response. So as I mentioned in my presentation, they are required to review all comments and provide a response to the public comment. So you can.
I see.
Let's just see if I can.
Do you have examples of like well-written response to comments?
I do. I will use one of our examples actually here. So this past June, NIST issued a request for comments on their generative AI profile, which is using the NIST AI risk management framework and applying it to generative AI tools. So you can see, again, it's very important to outline what are you commenting on, who is the recipient, high-level summary, right? Justify why you are credible, why they should listen to you. So you can see we've outlined here the work that we have done, why we should be taken seriously, including here, again, bluff, always bottom line up front. Right here, you can see a high-level summary of our key recommendations and all of the signatories. Now, what's really important when you're doing this, so they had asked for comments in these specific areas like categorization of risks, foundational tasks for generative AI, risk management. Again, you'll see bolding is really important. It catches people's eye. They get a quick snap of, okay, what is this? What do we need to respond to? But what's also very important is that you provide the page number and track where this is in their document. It'll make it so much easier for them to be able to go back, turn to page 11 in their profile and see, oh, this is their recommendation on page 11. That makes sense. And you can see here we did the same thing under their measure 1.1. This is what you should be adding. Now, this is a much lengthier document. We replied to, I think, nearly all of the questions that they had within each of the categories. Another one was on scoping of risks. You can see some more actions to manage risks, and we provide those comments to them. One point I want to make to all of you is that you do not have to respond to all of the questions that they have. You can respond to the questions that make most sense for your organization and your expertise. When I was starting in my career in this space, I had reviewed other entities that had submitted comments. Some organizations will respond to every single question. That is a strategic move because the agency must review all submissions. It's a way for them to get their agenda in front of that agency. So you will see that they will reply to a question in a way that just reaffirms their main point that they're trying to make. I don't necessarily recommend that methodology. I think it's better to just focus on the questions that you have deep expertise in, where you are making a direct contribution to answering that question. But I do want to raise that up, that you will see other entities reply to every single question. They might not really reply to that question. You'll see their agenda starting to emerge. that they're just trying to really beat them over the head with when submitting, but I don't recommend that methodology. I can give another example. This was in response to the executive order on generative AI in the state of California, where they were seeking feedback on what the state of California should do. So you can see these are their questions that they had posed to us that they wanted us to respond to. And right here, you can see we didn't respond to question 3. We didn't feel we had anything to contribute, so we just didn't answer it. But it is helpful to include that question in there. You can see we just did a double dash saying, we don't have anything to provide on that. Let's see if I have. And here's the EU submission, which talked about, but you can see here, you already saw the executive summary in the slide deck, high level bolded, so they know what to do. And here are our comments in response to their questions posed.
Brandie, I have a question.
Yeah, of course.
If there's a page limit that's pretty short, say 5 pages, is it still important to include that executive summary at the beginning?
I would actually.
Maybe the only thing they read out of 5
Yeah, it might be the only thing that they'll read. I mean, they have to read the whole thing, but it is so valuable to have just this bolded, this is what you need to do. And our executive summary builds off of all of our recommendations and insights across all of their questions.
I guess it might be also kind of a forcing function for a person writing to focus on what am I actually trying to say? Because once you try to boil it down to an executive summary, you're like, I actually don't know what I'm trying to say here. And I think it pushes you to maybe frame it in a more concise and clear manner.
Yeah, it's a good point. And also you can use your executive summary later if you want to write a policy memo, right? Based off of your response to their request for comment or request for information, you can go back and then now put it in that policy memo format. Also having this executive summary 1-pager, if you follow up with any of these stakeholders, now you have a 1-pager that you can give to them. Obviously, you'll want to reformat this, put up at the top, why are you recommending these things? How do you have the expertise? This is what they should do. And then contact information. It's very important to actually have physical documents, something with you when you meet with policymakers, if you're meeting with them in person. I know that is not as common anymore to have physical documents, except that policymakers and their staffers, they might be meeting with 20 different people in a day, right? They have a very packed schedule. So it's easier for them if they have something physical that later when they're moving things on their desk and they're looking through their bag and they pull out your 1-pager, they'll remember, this person had these really great ideas. Whereas if somebody else didn't leave something behind, they might just forget about it. So it's a good way of reminding them.
Do you have any example of how do you derive impact from this? Maybe you wrote this 8-page document and you sent, and how do you know that it made a splash actually?
Yeah. So first you want to look at how they are. Let me just go back here to regulations.gov. So here they're going to do a response to public comment, which then you can see how they have summarized your insights. The second way of impact is that they might cite your submission in a future version. So for example, the NIST AI risk management profile for general purpose AI, they've cited our recommendations to know a change in the profile. So that's how I can see that they actually read what we said and acted on it. As said before, though, the federal agencies oftentimes already know what they're going to do, and this is a requirement for them to implement. And you might not feel like you're having impact, but you can, right, through those 2 mechanisms of others are going to see your comments and they can cite that work. And second, if there are lawsuits later, that can be used in discovery, where during, the case, they'll say, look, you were warned that not implementing this strategy would cause X, and you didn't act on it. You didn't take the guidance from these experts. So
I'll have to respond to why, and so at least it still would continue having an impact even after that's been ignored, maybe in the first iteration.
Exactly. And a way to track this is to set up like Google News alerts, like Google Scholar alerts. That's how I see when our work is being cited by an entity.
Okay, it's very helpful.
Great.
I didn't know this thing shows up in Google Scholar.
Yeah, these types of things do. They'll be pinged. Yeah, I've seen actually the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy had cited some of our work. Yeah, and I think it'd come through that way, which was quite amazing. Yeah. So one thing I encourage you all to do is to go to regulations.gov and look through, put in some keywords, see what entities. You can even look by agency. For example, if you're working in the health space, you might want to go directly to the FDA and look at their requests for comments, or NIH, National Institutes of Health, and see, are there comment periods open now that I can contribute to, and really think through, how does your work inform their needs? Not like I continue saying, and I apologize for like continuing to hammer on this. It's unhelpful to just provide comments of don't do this, don't do that, bad idea. It's better to say, look, based off of my expertise, you should do this, and this is why. Now, the second is, how can you effectively compile feedback? We're all extremely busy. We all have tight time frames. There's only so many hours in the day. So one thing that you can do is partner with other organizations. One really smart move is to look, for example, NIST. I can look and see who else provided comments on a similar topical area and reach out to them and say, hey, us working together will make a stronger contribution to this. Let's work together and share resources. That can be a more effective way rather than just doing it independently alone. And with that, a reminder that workshops 1 through 3 are now available on the CITRIS Policy Lab website. The first workshop was on how do you communicate science to a broad public audience. The second workshop was on how to have policy impact. How do you write a policy memo? And an opportunity, which is still open, to work with the Day One project through the Federation of American Scientists, provide comments. And then a last workshop was on how to guide policymakers, how can you more effectively communicate with them? And then today was responding to unsolicited and solicited requests for information, which will be posted shortly. So thank you again for joining us in the CITRIS Policy Lab Science Communication and Policy Impact Workshop Series.